Good morning. I'd never met Stu before today, but I've corresponded with him a lot through email, and that Adopt an EVE program is really great. It's nice when you're over there to know that somebody back home is thinking of you. Okay, I am going to talk about the Iraq War from the air, but there's a couple other things that I wanted to talk about also. One of them is while I was at Williams, I didn't really know anything about the military, so I don't see a lot of young people in the crowd, but I know everybody has kids and grandkids, so I just want to talk very briefly about how somebody would get into the military, because I didn't even think about it till I was a senior. And then I'll talk about why I joined, and then how someone would become a fighter pilot if that's what they were going to try and pursue. Briefly talk about the Air National Guard, and then I'll go into F-16 capabilities, how we fit into Iraq. Talk about a couple of the more rewarding combat missions I was on, and then I'll show some pictures of sort of a day in the life over there of what we do, and then talk about the threat and minimizing collateral damage. So everybody knows what the services are, but the way you get into them is you just call a recruiter, or they'll call you, or they'll track you down at a sports event, and you can enlist and get money to go to college, or if you want to be an officer, you need to have a college degree. So you can either go to one of the service academies, the Air Force Academy, any one of the academies. Those are free. They're a little bit hard to get into, but it's a free education, or Reserve Officer Training Corps, or you can do what I did. Since we don't have ROTC at Williams, afterwards I went to Officer Training School. Officer Training School is unique because when you sign up, you know what career you're going into. So I was going to Officer Training School and joining the Air Force already with a pilot slot. You take a test called the AFOQT, which is similar to the SAT with a little bit more pilot and navigator specific one. And then the Marines and Navy and Army all have their own version of that test. Reasons to join is if you want to serve your country, you get skills, you get discipline, you learn a lot about teamwork. You get to travel a lot. It's a great experience. It gives you confidence. And if you enlist, you can get money and basically get free college. So why I joined initially is because I wanted to fly fighters. But then as I learned more and more about the military as I was in it, it became a lot more than that to me. And kind of the most important part of it for me is the service element, the ability to do something valuable that serves the greater good. And I strongly believe, and I tell young people all the time, that if you can find something that you're good at, that's challenging and satisfying to you, that you can make a living at, that it's very easy to go to work and it makes your life pretty meaningful. I really like how some other countries have 1 year mandatory service at 18, either in the military or Peace Corps, Civilian Conservation Corps, something like that. It kind of gives kids direction before they flow straight from high school into college, gives them a little real-world experience. And I think that would be a good thing for our country to adopt. Quick political disclaimer. When we joined the military, we swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and we're instruments of policy set by elected civilian leaders. So my job is not to state my political views. In fact, I'm not even supposed to talk about that when I'm in uniform. My job is to be better at my job than the enemy is at his, so that when I'm called on to go to war, to fly, fight, and win, that I do that. So if someone was interested in becoming a fighter pilot, they would get commissioned first, either through one of the service academies, ROTC or Officer Training School, and then you go to basic pilot training. It's about a year of flying and studying. It's pretty high pressure, but it's also really fun. You're always 3 rides from washing out, which means you can be great, smoking the program, top guy in your class, and you have a problem in one area, they're going to give you another ride, and they're going to give you another ride, and the last ride is with the squadron commander, and if you don't pass that, you're gone. So you can go from doing great to being washed out within about a week. It's very challenging and rewarding, and the best way I can explain it is the pressure is about equivalent to final exams week in college for about a year. Then you go to survival school, land and water. Then you go to fighter training in your airframe, and that's about another year. So it's about 2 years of training. At the end of that, they've spent about $8 million on you, so you have a service commitment. Right now, as a pilot, it's 8 years that you basically have agreed to stay in the service for 8 years. Then when you show up at your squadron, you're a wingman, and you're only going to fly with instructors and get a grade sheet written on you for about 20 rides, and then you're a combat-ready wingman, and you're allowed to deploy to combat. Then you progress to flight lead, where you're leading the formations. Then you become an instructor. But even as an instructor, you're always learning, even from the young guys. Every single sortie we take apart in detail at the end of it. And we analyze our tapes, and we're constantly trying to get better. It's not easy, but if you like a challenge and you want it badly enough, a pipeline would be take the AFOQT or the Navy or Marine version, see how it goes, start civilian flying training, see if you like it. And then just in the Vermont Air Guard, we take pilots from all the different services. They get out of the military and join the Guard. But when we take our initial young guys that we're going to send to pilot training, we just had a board a couple of years ago where we had 300 applicants, and we picked 3 guys out of that. And then of the last 8 candidates that we've sent to pilot training, 4 have made it through and were qualified to fly fighters. Some of them made it through, but ended up flying tankers or transports, which is great too. Why do I say all this? Is that it's really worth it. It's fun, it's challenging, and I wish that more EFs tried to do it, because I think they would like it. The view's not bad from up there. It's extremely rewarding to be able to influence the battlefield. You know, we're kind of at the tip of the spear up there. We can get somewhere very quickly. And the BL, or the bottom line, is that being able to help out the guys on the ground and save lives is extremely rewarding. I've had the opportunity to do that quite a bit. So this is a quick history of the Guard. It basically came from our founders. They debated the design of the first military establishment, and they talked about a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Those militias evolved into the Guard. And in Vermont, where the Green Mountain Boys were directly descended from Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys that took Fort Ticonderoga. So in the Air Guard, we have 3 missions. There's the community mission, which is all the time, and that's just to participate in local and state programs and add value to the community. It's a lot of educating, it's a lot of mentoring young people, volunteering. And then we also have state missions, where in peacetime we report directly to the governor of the state, and that's protecting life and property, peace and order, civil defense. And then when there's national emergencies, or just when it's our turn to go, we get activated federally. And actually, I've been activated federally most of the time since September 11th. Most of the pilots in our squadron have. And then our job is to support the U.S. Air Force mission, train for wartime, in peacetime, train for our Air Expeditionary Force, which is our combat deployment. And then right now in the United States, all around the country, there's fighters sitting air defense alert, and we're one of the squadrons that does that. We have 2 sites, actually, where we have manned fighters on alert at all time. I just got off alert yesterday morning at about 5:30 in the morning, and we're ready, if the horn goes off, to sprint out to our jets and take off very quickly and go out and intercept whatever type of hijacked airline or whatever the threat would be. And then our wartime mission is the Air Force mission to fly, fight, and win. Volunteerism is a big part of it. 2/3 of the Air National Guard are part-time, and they have civilian jobs, and they do the 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. It actually ends up being a lot more than that because we're deployed so much, but we'll give a part-timer a spin-up for a while, and then they'll deploy with us. And we don't have the strength in our squadron just with the full-timers to execute our tasking, so we rely on everybody. Just a quick statistic to say how old we are is that 97% of the pilots in the Air Guard have more than 500 hours experience in their jet, compared to 35% of the Air Force. And in the Vermont Air Guard, our average pilot F-16 time is 1,600 flight hours. My last Air Force squadron that I was in, our average time was 350 hours. So it's older, more experienced guys doing the mission. In the Vermont Air National Guard, we have doctors, vets, lawyers, financial guys, engineers, law enforcement, firemen, teachers, basically all walks of life, and then they are also in the Air National Guard. So we're heavily involved in the community. The Air National Guard is in all 54 states and territories. There's 88 flying wings total, but actually that just got cut down quite a bit with this latest base realignment and closure. Congress shut down a lot of Air National Guard bases or took away their flying mission. Have about 108,000 people, 1,100 aircraft. And the biggest thing to take out of this as a taxpayer should make you feel good is that in the Air National Guard, we do 34% of the Air Force's mission on 7% of the Air Force's budget. So it's a good deal for the taxpayer. Okay, this is a day on the job. This is me over Iraq coming up to a tanker, and I'm going to quickly go through the capabilities of the F-16. To give you a little background, it's a single-seat, single-engine jet. The max weight we can carry with fuel and bombs is 38,000 pounds. We've got about 28,000 pounds of thrust coming out of our single engine. In our combat configuration, we carry 14,000 pounds of gas, which is about 2,000 gallons. And we'll burn that up in about 2 hours. So it's about 1 mile per gallon. We can go 1,500 nautical miles without refueling. Our top speed is Mach 2, which is twice the speed of sound. It's about 1,400 miles an hour. And our tactical cruise, just what we fly at most of the time, is 0.9 Mach, which equates to 9 miles a minute. So when we're flying along, about every 6 seconds you're going a mile. Our max altitude is 50,000 feet, and that's by Air Force regulation because we don't carry pressure suits. If you suddenly depressurized above that, your blood could boil and it could kill you. But the F-16 has enough thrust to go much higher than that. We always employ as flights of 2 or 4. We're highly maneuverable. We have 9G turning capability, and then we carry a wide range of missiles, bombs, and our 20-millimeter cannon. The avionics and sensors are what keeps us modernized, because the jets that we're flying in the Guard are a little older than the Air Force's jets, so they plug and play new avionics or sort of electrical things all the time. And the things that make us so capable are our situational awareness data link, which allows people to pass us information and us to pass other people information and each other without talking. We also have a lightning, basically a targeting pod. It's a very advanced targeting pod that allows us to see things on the ground, day or night, designate them, whether they're still or moving, show other people where they are, and then also illuminate them with a laser spot, and then drop a laser-guided bomb either from our plane or another plane, which guides on that laser and goes right through that spot to destroy the target without hitting anything around it. We also carry a reconnaissance pod, which we use for battle damage assessment, and also to take pictures for future operations that are just about to go down. They can call us and say, hey, we need some imagery of this, and we need it quick. And we can either take it and land, or we actually have the capability to downlink it real time while we're flying to the guys that are going to use it for their mission. And that's pretty valuable. We also have an embedded GPS INS, which gives us system accuracy of our own position as well as finding targets that we have good coordinates for anywhere in the world within about 10 feet. This is a picture of the display, and I'm not going to belabor this, but this would be a fairly simple saddle display. This is the gateway. This is each one of these things that you see on here is another plane. We can identify friend, hostile, or unknown. This is me right in the center here. I'm on a 40-mile scope, and I know the altitude and airspeed of everybody here, and I can tag each one of these guys and check out who they are and basically get a whole bunch of information in a very short amount of time. This is a display of the targeting pod from about 7 miles away. It's a building, and the cursors are, if you dropped a bomb, that's where they would go. This is at night. This is an infrared picture, and actually it doesn't show up very good on here, but it actually is. You can focus it very well, and you can really tell a lot of detail, to include seeing people and whether or not they're carrying weapons from the altitudes that we fly at. Pretty valuable. Okay, just quickly, I'll just go through the loadout here. On the outboard stations, we're carrying the AMRAAM. It's an advanced medium-range air-to-air missile. It's the best radar missile in the world right now. Very long-range, active radar missile. I can fire it at somebody, and then I can leave, and it's going to go get them. On this wing are 2 500-pound laser-guided bombs. These are 370-gallon fuel tanks, which give us our extra range. This is a GPS-guided bomb. That's the 2,000-pound version, but we also carry a 500-pound version, and that's the targeting pod right there. And then the radar's in the nose. Here's a 2,000-pound version of a laser-guided bomb. What you see here is anti-Iraqi force, basically a bad guy fleeing the site of an ambush, and there's a laser-guided bomb in the air, and it directly. It's a direct hit. That's 10 seconds left to go. We carry a 20 millimeter cannon, which we use for air-to-air and air-to-ground. We could take off from Burlington and be in New York City in less than 20 minutes. And the way we fly around in Iraq, they have the fighters so that we can respond to basically anything that's going on the ground within about 10 minutes. Here's a picture of my heads-up display. This is a cockpit view of what it looks like at night. The bottom line out of all that is that it's a lot of technology, it's cutting edge, and it changes all the time. And it takes me a lot of my time to stay up with what's going on in our jet. They just came out with a new software upgrade that if you know the old one cold, it's a 200-page manual to understand the differences. And just as an example, I've got switches and buttons all over my throttle in my left hand and switches and buttons all over my throttle in my right hand. There's 3 that are controlled by my right thumb. One of those switches does 21 different things. Whether I push it forward and hold it, push it forward and let it go, quickly right once, long right, hold, twice right, less than half a second. So I've got 6,000 hours of flight time, a little over 2,300 in the F-16, and it's challenging for me to study enough to keep up with, and I have to teach this to the young guys also. When we deploy over to Iraq, the Army and the Army Guard, they generally go for a year to 15 months, and they'll get extended for up to a year and a half. In the air side, we go for 120 days, and often the Guard will split that up into 2 or 3 different units. We work 24/7, so we divide up into day shifts and night shifts. I was on the night shift last time, so those pictures I'll show you. And then we generally work 12 to 15 hours a day. We work about 6 days in a row, and we're supposed to get a day off a week, but we don't always. This is an old slide to get it declassified. There's Bungie and his buddies in their Humvee. Bottom line, the Marines are in the Western AO, or Area of Operations, in Al-Anbar province, which is from Baghdad west. The coalition forces, the Brits and the other guys, are down here in the south around Basra and a little north. And then the Army is the Sunni Triangle all the way up to the Turkish border. That's sort of where people are. Close air support is our main mission that we do over there, and I'll give you a couple examples, but we also do pre-planned precision strike. We escort convoys, helicopters. Most of my work with helicopters is when they get shot down, I show up on scene and I take over and try and keep the bad guys away from them until our helicopter guys can get rescued. And I've had to do that a couple times. We integrate with all the other platforms over there, the AC-130 gunship. There's lots of unmanned aerial vehicles, Predators, Reapers, like that, and we also work with other fighters, and we're always on call for troops in contact. That's the bottom line, is when Bungie and his buddies on the ground get in trouble and they need us, they call for fixed wing CAS, and we can be there within 10 minutes, hopefully to influence the battlefield. This is another video that's going to show you a 500-pound laser-guided bomb going through this building, completely destroying it, and these cars that are next to it and these buildings around it are untouched. They got a little bit of holes in them, but basically they didn't blow over. So minimizing collateral damage is absolutely critical. We have a classic insurgency going on in Iraq right now, and the only way, there's no way to win it militarily, but in order to even justify our presence over there, we've got to win the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people and give the Iraqis time to get their own act together. So we can't be killing stuff that's not a military target, and we can't be killing civilians. So we're very careful about that. We go kinetic, which means employ weapons only when it's absolutely necessary. There's very strict rules of engagement that are, it's like 600 pages of them right now. We have to know those cold before we go over there, and we get tested on them all the time. And there's a long chain of conditions that have to be met before we can employ ordnance. And we do that as a last resort to save lives on the ground. Often we'll do a show of force first, and I'll go through that. So quickly, I'm running out of time here, but an escort mission that I did in Sadr City, there was a mechanized infantry battalion, I think it was, that was conducting a cordon search where they're roping off the whole neighborhood of Sadr City, which is on the north side of Baghdad. It's kind of slummy. It's like Compton or 8 Mile, if anybody's ever been there. And they got ambushed by anti-Iraqi forces with a huge vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. Huge truck bomb went off, and then RPGs and small arms. Bad guys start coming out of the woodwork. Huge firefight ensues. There's friendly armored personnel carriers that are burning. There's guys wounded. There's screaming going on the radio. There's tanks pulling up to alleys, turning their turrets sideways and shooting pickup trucks full of bad guys right down alleys in the city. We arrive on the scene pretty quickly. Initially, we're finding the guy that we need to talk to on the radio, and then we're directing the friendlies to the position of snipers that are on the roof, shooting them with RPGs and sniper rifles. The Joint Terminal Attack Controller on the ground calls us in for a show of force, and we drop down very low, and we come over fast, an afterburner, and we flew, 2 F-16s flew over, and as soon as we flew over, the fighting stopped. The bad guys disengaged, and the friendlies were able to get their wounded and dead out of there and evacuate. So we basically stopped the engagement without having to fire a shot. Counter mortar, we spend a lot of time doing this. The bad guys are always lobbing mortars and rockets into the bases over there, so we'll try and catch them in the act. We've caught guys and followed their truck, leaving the spot where they fired it, followed them back to a building where they hold up, and then we send in the quick reaction force. They take down the building, go in, and they swab everybody's hands, and the ones that have explosive residue on them, they get arrested because they were involved in it. And I was in one mission where they got 10 enemy prisoners of war. Quick troops in contact. I haven't even talked to this about Bungie. Maybe he was there. It was in Fallujah. There were some Marines pinned down by mortar and RPG fire and heavy machine gun fire east of Fallujah, just south of the Cloverleaf. I know you're familiar with that. They called in fixed wing casts. I got a verbal talk on to 3 buildings out in the open where the bad guys were holed up. And I did 3 separate passes, dropped 1 bomb on each building, and destroyed all 3 buildings. And the Marines were able to evacuate and continue their mission. The threat over there is to the ground guys. It's not really to us in the Air Force. So we prioritize protecting the guys on the ground. They're the heavy lifters over there. For the Air Force, it's indirect fire. We're basically confined to our base unless we're out flying. And the base where I go to in Iraq gets attacked on the average once a day, incoming rockets and mortars. So we wear body armor and helmets, and we have bunkers all around base. And as an attack goes off, we all either just hit the deck if it's going to be an immediate, or we crawl into a bunker if it's going to last for a while. The biggest threat to us is having a mid-air collision with all the other planes and unmanned aerial vehicles that are over flying around, and also screwing up. There are guys, no one in my squadron, thankfully, but every time I've been over there, there's been guys in other squadrons that have done something wrong, have gotten grounded and gotten sent home. So that's a big threat for us. Imagine 150 planes in one piece of sky over a city. Imagine Boston. Everybody's procedurally deconflicted laterally and by altitude. Everybody's blacked out. We're all flying on night vision goggles. Some guys are diving at the ground. And if I'm doing 9 miles a minute and another guy's doing 9 miles a minute, that's 18 miles a minute closure. So you got to pay attention. You got to stay focused. You got to prioritize. And you can't be tired when you fly. Bottom line is we really have to work it so that we get our circadian rhythm so that when I take off, I am alert. And generally, we're busy enough, stuff's happening, that it's pretty easy. Okay, quickly, here's my hooch over there, concrete barriers. I live in a trailer. It's got sandbags around it. I wake up at 2100. That's 9 o'clock at night. I go to chow with my buddies. We're wearing our reflective belts so we don't get hit by some Army guy driving around with his lights off. We got our helmets on, and we wear ballistic eyewear just to protect. I don't know if you can see that, but we wear ballistic eyewear to protect our eyes from shrapnel. This is actually the gun system that tries to shoot down the incoming rounds. So a mortar attack on the way to ops, we call it, to work, and this is the outgoing fire trying to shoot down that mortar before it hits our base. I'll go in, I'll brief intelligence, weather, the ground liaison officer, find out what the Army and the Marines and the Special Forces are doing that night. They'll tell me what missions I'm expecting to support. This takes about 3 hours, and I do a flight brief with my wingman. I pre-flight my jet and weapons. This is me getting ready to take off. Mad River Glen, by the way, gives us free seasons passes for you and your whole family. Anybody in the Vermont Air or Army Guard that's a combat veteran, they give our whole family free seasons passes, so that's pretty huge support right there. I don't have pictures of while I'm flying because I'm pretty busy. I don't have time to take pictures, but this is the last air refueling at sunrise at the end of a 5-hour mission, and this is kind of what it looks like from my cockpit as I'm coming up on the tanker to get gas. Sandstorm rolls in, land back at base, shoot an instrument approach, land in the sandstorm, go in and debrief intel, review our tapes. If we did anything, show of force or employed any kind of ordnance, all kinds of high-level guys are going to be reviewing our tapes. So we're under very, very high scrutiny over there. This is the Cadillac where we go to shower and shave and things like that. Time to go to chow again. It's 11 o'clock. Go get lunch, or for us it's dinner, getting ready to go to bed. Driving to work, or driving back to the chow hall, we ride around and pick up trucks over there. There's random explosions all the time, and you get kind of jumpy over there because you don't know what the explosion is. In this case, it was explosive ordnance disposal, just blowing up bombs and things that they'd brought on base. But when you're over there, and actually for a while when I get home, I'm pretty jumpy. If a car backfires, sometimes I hit the deck. Here's some guys playing hacky sack. It's extremely hot over there. When I got over back this last time in September, we were hitting 130 degrees Fahrenheit a lot of days. So you really have to stay hydrated, drink tons of water and Gatorade. In peacetime, we have the luxury of not flying when the weather is bad, but over there sometimes we have to fly, even if there's thunderstorms. Hit the rack about 2 o'clock and then get ready to get up the next day and do it again. This is an aerial view of our base, which showing the concrete bunkers. This is an old Iraqi MiG-23. We're at an Iraqi air base over there. This is one of their old planes. This is a mosque that's on the base. There's also an Olympic-sized swimming pool with giant platforms that when the attacks aren't too bad, we're allowed to go to the pool. This is standing in front of one of the hardened aircraft shelters that the Iraqis use to protect their jets. This is our Iwo Jima shot. This is what it looks like refueling from a tanker from another jet. That's the F-16 getting gas from a KC-135 in the air. And then I think I went a little bit over on my time. I apologize, but over to the ground forces, and these are the guys. This is why we're really there, is to support the guys on the ground. So I have the utmost respect for you guys, and turn it over to you at this time.
As Stu mentioned, I'm Bungee Cook. I'm an infantry guy, so we have 2 switches on our instrument: safety and fire. These guys are a little smarter than us. 1,400 hours in the cockpit. Average age of the infantry guy is 19 years old. So before you get to combat, potentially you could be wearing the same clothes you're wearing right now in civilians, have your head shaved, then 4 months later be in country. So what I'm going to give you right now is a muddy boots perspective of what Wiley just gave you. Infantry Marine Company in Iraq last summer as part of the surge, as it was called. I'm based out in Camp Pendleton, and what you see in front of you is Lima Company. It's a reinforced mechanized infantry company, which is a fancy word for, in addition to boots, we have vehicles with tracks to walk around. To substitute for walking around. Additionally, we have Humvees and armored trucks and tanks. So with that said, I want to thank you in advance because we're pretty blessed. Whether you're in the medical, infantry, aviation, this fight is getting a lot of support from the American public. Doesn't matter if you support the war or not. I'm here to tell you that the troops are well supported. Whether it's folks like you or folks like Stu or folks buying you a beer at your local bar. So please keep it up. So we talked about big picture in Iraq. What I'm going to take you into right now is Anbar province. Just to orient you, Baghdad's over here. West of Anbar is Syria. And as part of the surge, really the purpose behind the surge was taking care of the fringes. The big towns, aside from Sadr City in Iraq, were pretty well secured. But what happens when you secure a town if you picture squeezing Jell-O in your fingers, where does that Jell-O go? It's got to go somewhere. Okay? So what we were working is the fringes. And conceptually in Iraq right now, the towns, cities are going to be policed by Iraqi policemen, and the Iraqi army ideally is going to be on the exterior of the towns. If there's a reactive force required, then that army unit will come in. So what we were doing is cleaning up around a town called Fallujah, you may have heard of. Okay, Fallujah is west of Baghdad, right over here. And this road up here, this laser pointer isn't too powerful, but this road up here had not been opened since 2003. Okay, it's a road that we named called Lincoln. And if you go left of the map right here is Baghdad, and there's a direct link right to Ramadi and eventually all the way out to Syria. So our mission was pretty simple. Open up that road and clean out the Al-Qaeda. Okay, the intersection of this purple road and the yellow road up to the top right of your screen is where there's an Al-Qaeda stronghold. So that was our job, and we had about 300 guys to do it, but a lot of confidence because we also had folks overhead. First thing we're going to do is orient you to the environment. Pretty hot over there, as Wiley mentioned. For us, we didn't have cans to live in. Guys are sleeping in the dirt. Okay, so when you're sleeping in the dirt, there are things that you need to deal with that you don't necessarily have to deal with in the States, at least Williamstown. This particular area, if you can believe it, what you're looking at used to look like County Clare in Ireland in the late 80s, early 90s. Okay, once the sanctions kicked in, electricity, fuel in this area basically suffocated any of the agriculture. But this is really a breadbasket of Iraq. For you foodies out there, some of the best rice in the world used to come from this area in Iraq. But as you can see right now, there's not a lot going on. To orient you here, this is a huge canal. Wiley can probably see it when he is pushing 50,000 feet, as well as the folks up on the space station right now. The grandeur of this canal, to give you an idea, that's a 100-foot berm here, and the second one is 200 feet. Massive canal project that Saddam initiated in the early 80s, and this is called the Arm of the Tigris. If you are looking down this road right now to orient you, up on this left part of the screen is the berm of the canal. The reason I mention that to you is you have high ground. Whether you're fighting an insurgency or you're fighting a conventional World War I Western Front type engagement, high ground is important. So what we're doing now is clearing this road I mentioned to you, but we also have folks that are up on the high ground covering us. On occasion, we'll get fighters in. More likely, we'll have rotary wing helicopters that are looking over our heads, looking over the next horizon, see if there's any bad guys around. Here's an example of a sniper team up on the berm. They're constantly in communication with us, and as they see threats, they either prosecute them or we send out a reconnaissance party to confirm them or work with the aviation if it's too far out of our range to go take care of it. This is one of the few photographs you're going to see of a Marine outside the wire without his flak jacket on. Okay, the IED threat, the mortar threat is so great over there that helmets, flak jackets, flame retardant, uniforms, gloves, eye protection, essential at all times. 120-degree heat, that obviously causes some challenges. As we worked from our way from east to west down this road, it's about a 40-kilometer road. As you know from, I mentioned, 2003 to 2007, there had been no coalition presence there. The big takeaway for you is that meant the enemy had a long time to set up their defense. Okay, so this is looking through a tank sight. Probably not as high speed as the F-16 heads-up display, but this is the latest in tank technology. You're looking through a TV camera, but this sight goes in a thermal mode as well. And bottom right-hand corner gives you a precise location of the target, gives you a range. So when you are working with the aviation, with their precision bombs, you can get that bomb exactly where it needs to go. Anytime you're going down a road in Iraq, your biggest threat, if you're in a vehicle, is an improvised explosive device. So what we have over there right now are a number of different ways to counter that threat. And what you're looking at here is called a Husky. Okay, that's the latest VHUL technology. In other words, instead of taking the blast underneath the vehicle, it's going to dissipate the blast away from the vehicle, a lot like a boat does a wave. The third vehicle behind the tank right here is called a Buffalo, and that radiates, it's massive metal detectors that radiate electricity in the ground searching for metallic pings. If they find a ping, then they bring up the Husky. It has essentially a backhoe on the front of it, and they're going to go investigate. In the event that they do find something, then they're going to go exploit it. If they don't, this is what happens. Okay, this is a wrecker from that same convoy that this metal detector failed to detect the IED, and it was detonated. Okay, as you can see, the top of your screen, there's that massive berm I was mentioning. At that point, the clearing element that contained those metal detectors did a 180 and went back to base because they were mission incapable without that wrecker. So then that leaves the Marines to keep clearing on their own because we have a timeline we need to meet. So this is equipment that's organic to us. This is a truck, a 7-ton armored truck, wonderful piece of gear. And the front of it, for you farmers out there, looks like a flail mower, or golfers, looks like a gang mower on a fairway mower. That goes ahead of the vehicle and pushes down on the pavement. So if there is a pressure IED, it's going to be detonated. Okay, right here is a pressure plate. So in other words, if your tire drove over that, pressed that button down, it's going to be connected to a blasting cap in that IED, and it's going to explode. Okay, essentially you're completing the circuit. Motorcycle battery here, hooked up to the IED, put pressure on it, it blows up. That's one method. The other method is electronic radio detonation. I call a number on a cell phone, it rings that cell phone, it completes the circuit, bomb goes boom. We've done a really good job in the U.S. of mitigating that radio threat with electronic jamming. Okay, so in Anbar province, they're mostly pressure detonated IEDs and command detonated IEDs. In other words, instead of a button being pushed by a wheel on a truck or a foot, you got a guy that may be up to, I've seen up to 3,400 meters away, so it's pretty far away, pushing a button as soon as the truck goes over the mark. Okay. If you find an IED before it finds you, we try to work smarter than harder out there, and this is a robot that explosive ordnance guys use. Nothing fancy, it's got about 1,000-meter range, but it's going to go out and snoop and poop at whatever you think is the actual IED, and if you find it is an IED, then you're going to bring it back. There's a little arm right here, okay? You're going to put a piece of explosive on that, drive the robot back out to the explosive device, detonate the explosive, then go out and investigate it again. It's about a 2-hour process. So you can imagine if you're trying to drive from here to North Adams and you run into a couple IEDs, it's going to take you about 6 hours. Okay. This is another example of a pressure plate. Okay, what you're looking at there are 4 hacksaw blades, and they are taped together. So there's a piece of foam in the middle of the hacksaw blades. So if you put the hacksaw blades together, there's foam right here, but if you press with enough pressure, it's going to complete the circuit. That's pretty hastily laid. Obviously, they didn't do a lot of work burying it. Typical incident like this, maybe they fake a problem with their vehicle. So while they have their hood up, they throw this underneath their vehicle, then they drive away. What's this bag reminiscent of? A military ration, okay? Military rations look like this. What do Marines like to do? We like to clean, police. So a lot of times we pick up trash. That's what they're preying on right there, our tendency to clean. Although we have great sensors, we got the fancy metal detectors I mentioned to you, our best weapon out there for finding IEDs are cunning Marines with eyes. Curious, cunning Marines. So, you haven't seen water in this soybean field since '88. All right, what looks unusual about this? The Marine says, hey, this doesn't necessarily look like old '88 vintage dirt right here. Goes down, sticks his heel in the ground. What's he find under there? Copper wire. Where's the copper wire leading to? If you look up here, there's a cut in the berm. If you're 3,000 meters away from that road and you want to make sure the IED hits the truck that you want it to hit, you need a Barney-proof aiming point. Thus, anytime this weird-looking disturbed earth intersects with a Barney-proof aiming point, probably got an IED in that aiming point. Okay, so it's not rocket science, but you got to take your time. You got to be curious, just like Wiley's got to be with his 41 controls. You got to be alert. So you're searching houses. IEDs are your biggest threat. Maybe some of you are Bob Vila types out there, weekend warriors. You have this stuff in your house, but we over there got to err on the side of caution. So if you have this in your house, combined with, say, a half dozen motorcycle batteries and no motorcycle in the parking lot, then you're going to get detained and we're going to ask you some further questions. Our area, as you saw, wasn't necessarily great robotic maneuvering terrain, so sometimes you have to do the EOD exploitation old school style. We were blessed to have a team in direct support of us, but a lot of times you don't find all the IEDs. They've been working in that area for a long, long time. As a result, the enemy had them literally everywhere. Okay, farmers were driving over IEDs and blowing themselves up. This is an Amtrak that you can see burned to the deck. Everyone got out safely. Day in the life, this is what we're eating. We didn't establish our really patrol bases until a month and a half or two over there. So guys are sleeping in the dirt. We get some security up on the high ground and let them bed down. I did not allow the Marines to maneuver at night until we cleared the area because of the IED threat. All right, it's too great. Then we moved into coin operations. All right, a guy like me from Maine who went to Williams is not going to find IEDs as fast as locals who are here and have been living there their whole lives. So the essence of a counterinsurgency is winning the trust of the local population so they will help you find the threats. And that's what we did. We moved right into houses, established patrol bases. You can see Wiley talked about mortar attacks. All these houses are fortified for counter mortar, and also the sniper screens up here for counter sniper. It's too hot to sleep indoors in Iraq in the summertime, so you sleep outdoors or you sleep on the roof. Once we got the road open, we cleared 63 total IEDs. We lost 7 amphibious tracked vehicles that you saw, and we lost 6 armored vehicles, all the IED attacks. Okay, but once we open that road up, then you get your muddy boots on the ground police work. All right, you tell me which one of these trucks is hauling explosives. Hey, it's tough. So you're a 19-year-old Lance Corporal out there, it's 130 degrees, you can't speak much Arabic except pidgin or read a license. You got to really rely on your instincts and your interpreter. Checking IDs, then you're going to search a vehicle. Every Iraqi is allowed 1 AK-47. So this is a few too many, he'll get detained. We started a couple schools in our area. We started a medical clinic, and that's really a great way to win the affection of the people. And when that happens, intelligence starts flowing. This kid broke his leg. The family brought him to us, And our 19-year-old pediatrician did the best he could, taking care of the leg, but you can see that won a lot of hearts and minds. And that act is really to prevent this. And these kind of IEDs locations are not going to be found unless we keep up that goodwill work. And this is probably our best example all summer long, where we righted a wrong. We found an IED in a road, we blew it up. What was left? A big crater. So Marines, we want to make the road nice. We bring in concrete. What happens? It blocks the flow of an not ancient, but old culvert underneath from one side of the road to the other for water. So the imam comes up to me, says, hey, we're not too happy about this. Hey, no problem, we apologize. So that night, went and blew the road up again, installed the culvert in concert with the local people. And in doing that, the next day, that same imam tugged on my sleeve and said, hey, I got to show you something. Okay, walked me over to these two 250-pound IEDs about 300 meters away from his house that were buried in the field. So that's really how you win a counterinsurgency. It's not by blowing everything up in sight. It's by making friends with these folks, obviously having a plan to kill everybody, but the blunt instrument needs to be applied only when necessary. The ticket out of there for us, and victory for us on deployment, was securing the area enough that we could turn it over to the Iraqi army. And that's what we did in the end. They're moving in here. This is their colonel. I have a great deal of respect for him. He's prior Republican Guard, very competent officer, and really knows how to win in a counterinsurgency. We did lose a couple folks on our deployment. My company lost one Marine, Lance Corporal Stacy. He was killed by a sniper, shot in the jugular. He bled out in 48 minutes, but he was on the aircraft, Kazovac aircraft. We lost two explosive ordnance technicians that were walking and checking out for a secondary IED. But with that said, we have a tremendous Kazovac capability in theater right now. So this particular bird can be on station in our area within 20 minutes. Okay, you can land a bird. And right now with our training, we can keep any guy alive for at least an hour, whether it's hemorrhaging or arterial bleed. Then that's when we get it over to Paul and his boys. And that's where I'll turn it over.
Thank you. First, thanks to Stuart for that great introduction, for all he's doing with the Adopt EVE program, and also a thanks to the Alumni Affairs Office for organizing this event. It's really an honor for me to be on the stage with these two officers, and a treat to be back here in Williamstown speaking to an audience of alumni. But before I start, I have to sort of give the usual disclaimer, and that is I'm going to make some statements today, but they're purely my own and don't represent my chain of command. I've made that mistake before and have been on the receiving end of a one-on-one feedback session with a general. The other thing is, when you invite a surgeon with war experience to give a talk, there's going to be some graphic slides. So if there's some younger people in the audience, parents, just take note of that. They'll be later in the talk. I am really more of a surgeon than I am a soldier, and surgeons have this reputation of being egotistical, arrogant, self-centered SOBs. And that's not a fair characterization, because only about half of that is true. But we are, like these other military men, very goal-oriented, like this breed of mouse. And if I were to try to take you through the entire labyrinth of the military medical system today, we'd be here until sundown. So I have to take a direct route. And what I plan to do is show for you what happens to a casualty from where they're injured on the battlefront until when they get back to the home front. And I'll take you through the echelons of care, because that's how the military medical system is organized. So in Echelon 1, which is essentially the battlefield, you give yourself aid, or your buddy does, or a medic does. And that's mostly stopping the bleeding and starting some IV fluids. You're then moved back to Echelon 2, which is a forward support medical company. It's essentially a tent, maybe concealed, maybe with some cover. And that's really, there's a cot where you can lay on until you can get evacuated further to the rear. The problem is that Echelon 2 is still within the range of enemy fire, and so the military doesn't want to commit any expensive medical assets. The expensive hospitals are back in Echelon 3. This is a combat support hospital nicknamed a CASH. And this has all the facilities that a modern trauma center would have in any of our cities here in the United States. There's operating rooms, ICUs, blood banks, CT scanners. And that's where the bulk of the surgery on the wounded is happening in theater. From Echelon 3, the casualty then moves out of the Middle East, either to Landstuhl, Germany, a regional medical center, and then eventually back to the United States. This happens to be down in Texas. So let's go back to the beginning. Trauma is a 100% preventable illness. So the best way to take care of our casualties is to keep them from getting injured in the first place. And our modern battle armor is doing a fantastic job at that. With this vest on and the extension, the number of penetrating torso and abdominal injuries that we're seeing as military surgeons is minuscule. Mostly what we're seeing, as you would imagine from this, are extremity injuries. And extremity injuries are survivable provided you can stop the bleeding in the field. And stopping that actually relies upon some pretty simple technology. Believe it or not, when we started this conflict after 9/11, when soldiers were deployed in field, they were not given tourniquets to carry. Now, in the Civil War, they were, but in modern times, that wasn't part of the loadout of an Army GI. There's been developed tourniquets that are so fantastic now that you can actually apply them with one hand if you have the presence of mind while your arm is blown off to put it on. These are actually field tested in Natick, Massachusetts, the Army Reserve, at the Army Research Center, and now are part of the loadout on any Army soldier going into combat. The other thing that we have now are fancy dressings. In the old days, it was just a gauze bandage, and you wrapped it as tight as you could. Now these bandages are impregnated with material that actually stop bleeding. The agent in this one happens to be derived from the shell of shrimp. So, more shrimp to you. But those are just temporizing measures, and really to stop the bleeding, you got to get to a surgeon. And when we looked at our Vietnam War experience, we learned something. We learned that if a casualty got to a surgeon after 60 minutes, their chance of surviving fell precipitously compared to one who got there before 60 minutes. And thus was born this concept known as the golden hour of trauma. Now, when the planners for these modern conflicts kind of looked at the battle space, it became clear that if you have someone on the Afghan-Pakistani border who goes down, you may not be able to get them to Bagram, certainly not by ground because there's no roads, and not by air. Same thing in Iraq. The roads, as we've just learned from Major Cook, are not very passable. 6 hours to go from here to North Adams, you're going to die en route. So the solution to that was to move the surgeons forward. And so there was devised this forward surgical team where about 20 personnel, 4 surgeons, would move up to Echelon 2 or even into Echelon 1, set up and take care of the wounded there. They would load out in Humvees, about 6 of them, and move forward. They could be dropped off in Chinook helicopters, and they can even be parachuted in. There was one episode of that in the beginning of the Iraqi War. Now, when I joined the Army Reserve in 1992, I thought that the heaviest thing that I was going to have to carry around in the medical corps looked something like this. Apparently that's just the Air Force. I don't know, JR. But instead, in 2003, I showed up and they gave me all this junk to carry. I felt like one of Major Cook's Marines. But our reserve FST got the call at the beginning of the war, and we went from Kuwait up to Baghdad. And at the time, Baghdad itself had not been secured. And so all the FSTs, as represented by these rectangles, were set up around the perimeter of the city. And as the coalition forces went in to clear out neighborhood by neighborhood, the casualties would be brought out to the outskirts. We happened to occupy this bombed-out building, which was nice not being under canvas for a change, to operate. And this was our treatment area. As you can see, very austere for performing surgery. This is a picture of the team operating on 2 casualties at the same time. I'm going to show you a couple pictures now of some of our patients. This sergeant was actually manning the gate around our unit when he came under attack and mostly by small arms fire. And you can see where a round had struck him on the helmet, broke his helmet band, tore the helmet cover, but he just got a little peppering on the face. He became our poster child for wearing your helmet. Because here's a picture of a soldier who was guarding Baghdad University so that people could actually go to school. And he had his helmet off for whatever reason and suffered a fatal gunshot wound to his head. This is now Colonel Lanier Ward. He was at that time a major in a cavalry unit. He was driving through Baghdad when a roadside bomb blew up his Humvee. He was wearing his body armor and he was in an up-armored vehicle, so much of his trunk was spared, but his elbow was out the passenger side window as he was manning his weapon. And you can see from this x-ray what happened to his elbow joint. Now, from the middle of Baghdad at night to a combat support hospital was about a 1.5 hour to 2 hour trip. But with the FST, forward surgical capability, blood was able to be restored to his limb, and after a total of 22 operations, once he returned stateside, his arm was saved. So that he could go on to do very important things in the defense of our country, like appear on the Oprah Winfrey Show. This military policeman, a National Guard soldier from the Midwest, was sitting in the turret of his Humvee, manning a squad automatic weapon, when a grenade was thrown into the cab of the Humvee. That exploded, and all of his legs, both of his legs, which were unprotected, received the brunt of that blast. These are the buddies who pulled him out and literally carried him up to our area so that we could stop the bleeding at our particular FST. So these are our stories, but this is recapitulated over and over again by Army and Navy medical units across the country. But doing surgery far forward isn't the only successful thing. Medical providers are great ambassadors, and you've heard this theme already about winning the hearts and minds. This is two of the NCOs from our unit. We adopted a local school where we brought in donated clothing and soccer balls and things like that, hoping to win over the hearts and minds. We obviously have a little more work to do, and this guy's... And we'd go and conduct aid bag clinics in the local villages, a great way to figure out who's shooting mortars at you when you go in. Medical care is a commodity in the third world. And what was great was this particular soldier was assigned to give us security, and she comes in, with an M16 underslung grenade launcher, helmet, and the goggles and everything. Not the usual picture of American or Middle Eastern femininity, but as soon as she took off her helmet, all of a sudden all the girls in the village flocked to her side. Obviously a role model that they're not used to seeing. I put this slide in just because I think he got this hand-me-down T-shirt, and I think it's very ironic. You got a kid in the middle of a war zone wearing a DARE T-shirt. But the other benefit of being a medical group was that we provided the surgical capability to all the special operators in the area, which got us sort of into almost all the palaces very early. And so I got to take a dip in Saddam's indoor swimming pool. This was my sergeant sitting on Saddam's throne. And this is me sitting on Saddam's other throne. After traveling 5,000 miles, that was the first porcelain I'd seen in a long time. It made me miss those Mission Park porcelain gods that we used to worship back here. But anyway, getting back to the matter at hand, once we operate on them here, I'm sorry this doesn't project well, once we operate them in an OIF in theater, we got to get them home. And in previous conflicts, they would hang out in theater a long time, these casualties, because they were not stable enough to fly back. But now the Air Force has these flying intensive care units. They can load out the back of any of their transport aircraft with equipment and personnel to take the most critically injured people home. So what we see now is that there are soldiers and airmen and Marines who are injured, and within 24 or 48 hours, they're back home at a stateside treatment facility, and they might have gotten an operation or two along the way. Now, once you get home, you think everything would be rosy, but as you know, things aren't, all isn't right in the military healthcare system here in the United States. The Walter Reed neglect scandal is perhaps the best example of this, and this was brought to national attention by a series of articles in the Washington Post. And this centered around about 700 wounded warriors who were being housed at Walter Reed in the Washington area. The buildings that they were in were just terrible. We used to complain about the dorms here at Williams, but these were rodents, insects, mold, and most of these people were trying to either get out of this service or get their disability board through this bureaucracy, and they had to contend with this monster impediment ahead of them. As a result, a lot of people lost their jobs. The commander of Walter Reed, his immediate predecessor, as well as the Secretary of the Army, all heads rolled because of this. They had explanations, of course, and they even sounded legitimate in the sense that Walter Reed, it was not their mission to take care of these people. The problem is that the military facilities, the VA facilities, and the civilian facilities back home for these people weren't capable of handling the injuries that they were coming home with. And so Walter Reed was the last place in the pipeline where they got stuck. And on top of that, as JR mentioned, Congress is closing and realigning a lot of bases, and Walter Reed is slated to be closed. So there was no money to improve the physical plant. But anybody who's been in the military realizes that when you're a commander, you're expected to complete your mission, not give excuses. And so for that reason, these three people lost their jobs. But the thing that we learn from this is that the hardest part of the military medical mission in these wars is going to be taking care of the veterans. Right now we have a VA system that is marginally good. I kind of joke that if people want our government to run the healthcare system in this country, they ought to spend some time being a patient in a VA to see if they really like that. But the VA system is currently designed to take care of World War II, Korean, and Vietnam War veterans. Those are people who are old, who have heart disease and cancer and diabetes and old people diseases. The VA is not nimble, and it's not quite ready to take care of the stream of veterans that we're bringing home now. Now, we have some success for these veterans with special needs. You know, since the time of war, people have been losing limbs in war, and we've had artificial limbs. The oldest known example is from Egypt. This is a mummy with a wooden toe. But that technology didn't change much up through the Civil War. A wooden leg got a little better after World War II when plastic was developed. But now we have super high-tech lower extremity technology. Here's a guy who otherwise would be confined to a wheelchair who's out there jogging, and it even looks like he's kicking a little commander-in-chief tail. And when it comes to modern upper extremity technology, we're really approaching the science fiction. This is one prototype that's being fielded now. And the Achilles heel of this is finding out how can you actually implant these into a stump without them becoming infected. And some basic science researchers studying how deers grow antlers out of their head and how the skin forms around the antlers have come up with a way of implanting something in the stump of someone's finger and having the skin seal around it so it doesn't become infected. So the era of the $6 Million Man, that 1970s TV show, is upon us. But where we're falling short is in another kind of injury, one that's not as prevalent, not as visible, not as sexy as doing surgery on people. It's mental health and traumatic brain injury. This is very common. Both the New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA have published landmark articles on it. Right now, the suicide rate in the Army is the highest it's ever been since we started recording it. We don't even know how many veterans are committing suicide right now. And the other aspects of it are depression, marital problems, job performance. And these people that are coming home with these problems, these are not things that go away in a year, when the skin heals. These things can dog them for decades. Now, in theater, the soldiers and the Marines have a good support structure. They have a command that takes care of them. They have their buddies and a close-knit unit that support them. I'm not very religious, but I noticed that prayer is very common amongst the foot soldiers over there. But prayer is not a good policy or a good plan for taking care of them once they get home. And I'm about to show you some pretty powerful slides to give you a taste of what these young 18, 19, 20-year-olds have to experience and what they may carry with them for the rest of their life. This is something that for the weak of heart, now's the time to close your eyes and I'll tell you when you can open them again. But in this country, you don't walk down the street and see a mother dive into the ditch clutching her children because a firefight erupted, a child who's splattered with her own blood. In this country, you don't encounter a child who's had his hand blown off by a mortar and his face severely burned. In this country, you don't look over at your best friend who just tripped a landmine to see what's left of his lower extremities. And in this country, your boss doesn't tell you to go secure an area where a bomb just went off and pull out any survivors, or in this case, any of the dead, like this child. So those people on the ground, and it's not me, it's the guys like Major Cook here, who have to deal with this day in and day out, they're coming home with a lot of baggage, and we got to be ready to take care of them. And I'm proud to say, as Stuart mentioned earlier, that there's a handful of EIFs, and again, I'm sorry how this projected, who were involved in this, and of course, Nate Krisoff, who gave the ultimate sacrifice. So let me kind of close on an up note. The desert is a very dry place, not just in terms of water, but alcohol is also not allowed in theater for U.S. forces. And the rats over there are pretty big too. And here you see a very goal-oriented soldier going for the cheese. But, you know, that's the short-term gain, and I don't think he appreciates the trap that he might be falling into. And I think from a military medicine standpoint, short-term, we've done a great job with field care, rapid transport, and applying new technologies. And where we're failing, or where we have to do some work, is rehabilitating these soldiers who are coming home and planning for their future health problems, because we're going to be paying for this conflict for the next 50 years, whether we're in theater or not. And lastly, if anyone has any interest in learning more about some of the first-hand accounts of what's going on over there, I recommend this book to them. This is published by Random House. It's available at any major bookstore, cheapest at Amazon.com. It is a compilation of essays put out by the National Endowments of Art. They sponsored a competition for people involved in Afghanistan, Iraq, and on the home front to submit things. And there's some great reading in here. One of my essays happened to be in it, but I'm sad to say as a Williams person that my writing is the worst out of all of them. So I recommend this to you highly. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I think that myself and the other officers here will be happy to entertain any questions in the time that's remaining.
Sure. The Predator is one of a series of unmanned aerial vehicles, and there's a lot of them over in Iraq right now. A lot of people think that we're kind of in the last era of the manned fighter, that possibly these fifth-generation fighters, the F-35 and the F-22 that are coming online, will be the last manned fighters for more technology-advanced countries. The Predator, there's a lot of things it can do well. It can stay on station for a long time. It can track people. It can laze bombs for us. But what it can't do so well is it's real slow. It can't get out of our way when we need to employ ordnance. It's dangerous because there's nobody in there looking around, seeing and avoiding, which is one of the ways that we keep from running into each other. And it's definitely has its limitations. So it's very good at some things. It's not so good at some other things, but there are people who say it's the wave of the future and there won't be manned fighters for too much longer.
I'll take that, and I think Coach Farley's in here. I'm a team guy, and I've played a lot of team sports here, and I think a big part of the military, whether you're in an operating room or a squadron briefing room or in a flight or in the infantry, we're a tribe. And a lot like the teams here, I don't care if it's a team on the field or in a lab, you're a tribe as well. So I think the camaraderie, the take care of each other aspect of Williams definitely is something we all carried to the fight. And I don't care if it's in the fight or in your daily jobs, it's in us for sure.
Another thing I would add is young people ask me all the time if they want to join the military, should I get a technical degree? And I always tell people that a liberal arts education will never steer you wrong. It's a great foundation for being able to think critically, look at both sides of something, either articulate what your thoughts are or be able to write. So I think just a liberal arts education is invaluable no matter what you do.
I'll take this. I'm actually, at the tail end of my show, you saw that we turned our area over to the Iraqi army. Well, whether you're an American or Iraqi in the military, we always do what's called a relief in place, a turnover, and during that time you have a right seat, left seat, period. What that's a fancy word for is you take the guy who's been there for a while on the ground and he shows you where the bad parts of town and the good parts of town are. So in my case, we did do that for a month and a half with an Iraqi unit, and that mustache man I showed you on one of those slides, that colonel, I will tell you that that guy's been a soldier for over 20 years. He's fought all over Iraq, and he is very capable as a commander. He has been to Western schools, Western military schools. That is its greatest strength. The Iraqi Army's greatest weakness is its young guys. Okay, it's what we call Jundi. They're privates, they're PFCs. And the amount of ammunition, for example, they have to qualify on their weapon every year is 30 bullets or 30 rounds annually. So you try to get good at shooting with 30 rounds for 12 months, hey, it's going to be pretty tough. So operationally, they're very good. Spiritually, they got a lot of passion for what they do. As far as execution at the tactical level, they're still working out the kinks, but the trend is heading in the right direction. Question was, what percentage of the Iraqi guys that I've worked with had prior military service? I would say out of a 700-man battalion, you're looking at about 10% of that 700-man battalion. Right now in the Iraqi Army, if you were prior Army, i.e. Republican Guard, no matter what, you can come in at whatever rank you were at, okay? Collect your pension, the whole 9 yards. Same thing enlisted-wise. So there are folks coming back, and for a guy like me who's training and relying on the Iraqi Army, those are the franchise players that we try to plug into and leverage and kind of ink blot their capabilities. On the medical air side, I don't know if you guys work with any.
On the medical side, the Iraqi military medical establishment has not been rebuilt. Their civilian medical side has great physicians. Most of them were trained in the British system, but because of sanctions, they were essentially cut off from Western advances for the past 10 years. So they're very able, very committed, but lacking the sort of supplies and exposure to the advances. So currently, the coalition provides 100% of the medical support for the mission.
From the air side, there are no Iraqis yet that are well enough trained to actually talk to us on the radio. So there will be an American Special Forces troop or Army or Marine person that will be talking to me on the radio if there's a joint unit of Iraqis that need some air support. Ma'am?
Burns are relatively rare in civilian trauma settings, but they're very common in military trauma settings. And almost all of the research in burn care has been carried out in San Antonio at the U.S. Army Research Center that partners with the Air Force. And that's the major center in the country where even some civilian burns go. So the research is, yes, ongoing at all levels. At the basic science level, we're researching how to regenerate cells and grow tissue in culture, to at the macroscopic level of treating patients themselves, new ways to take care of them in the ICU and how to get them through rehabilitation after they're out of the ICU. So the answer is yes, we've made great strides just in the past 5 years since the war began. But burn injuries are devastating injuries, and rehabbing a patient with a burn injury is a 10-year project. It sort of depends upon what part of the war you look at, and whether you're looking at our forces or civilian forces, and what your sort of line of work is in the military. The question is what percentage of people are getting burned. At the beginning of the war, when there was still a sort of a bit of a conventional army resisting us, there were actually more burns than there are now. Now burns are mostly seen in the civilians who are caught in a structure fire because of something going off, an explosion going off in their building, or in crew members trapped within vehicles, things like that. Flash burns, which is when you're in the open and then there's an explosion near you and you get a flash burn, we see some of those, but those are actually the ones that are more rehabilitatable than the ones where you're actually entrapped within a burning structure. Sir,
To answer your question, I'd categorize it in two parts. One is Iraqi nationalists, which is, hey, people who just don't want anyone who's not Iraqi to occupy their country. This is a guy who was farming in one of those fields you saw, but now has to feed his family, and he's going to do everything he can to feed his family, and there's not a lot of harvest going on, so if he gets paid $500 to go lay an IED, he's going to do that. Okay, is he passionate about killing Americans? No, he's not. Is he passionate about helping his family? Yes, he is, and he's going to take care of business. Second category is Al-Qaeda. Okay, AQI, Al-Qaeda, Iraq. These are more the zealot types who want to establish Sharia law, which is fundamentalist Sharia law there, and they have probably come to Iraq to do their business. Does that answer your question?
So the question was, how well have the NGO, which stands for non-government organizations, responded to returning veterans as far as social support and so on? I'm not completely knowledgeable on that, but I'll speak to it as best I can. In that I was at the Williams Club in New York City, and I ran into a Williams alum who had organized a relief to get some of these guys back to work. And it sort of harkens back to this 1,000 points of light scenario that we've heard about in politics in the past, where there's a lot of grassroots support coming up one by one. Because, you know, organizing this octopus is hard. You have federal programs, you have state programs, you have local community programs, and you have private programs. I'm not even sure that this is the type of thing where you can actually have a czar who can organize all that. But it takes people like Stuart, you know, to just decide that they're going to do something. Or if you're a businessman and you decide you're going to make sure that you take care of your employees who come back as veterans. Or if you're a physician, you're going to make sure that you research how to take care of wounded warriors who are coming home.
I want to thank these three fine gentlemen for their service and for this incredible presentation. You make us all proud.